Well, Rashida Tlaib does it again. Between her and Ilhan Omar, they just can't help but make controversial comments. And almost all of the time, the controversial comments are anti-Semitic, it seems like. We know that they really don't like Israel, but it always seems to go beyond that. It was not Ilhan Omar this time, though. It was Rashida Tlaib, the Muslim congresswoman out of Detroit. Now, she was on the Yahoo News podcast called Skullduggery, and Holocaust Remembrance Week came up. And she said something that has a lot of people, well, some people scratching their heads, but a lot of people outraged. There's actually a few different reasons to be upset at what she said. But first, let's hear exactly what it is she said on that podcast. Here it is.
Just a few, I think 2 weeks ago or so, we celebrated, it took a moment, I think, in our country to remember the Holocaust. And there's a kind of a calming feeling I always tell folks when I think of the Holocaust and the tragedy of the Holocaust and the fact that it was my ancestors, Palestinians, who lost their land and some lost their lives, their livelihood, the human dignity, their existence in many ways have been wiped out on some people's passport. I mean, just all of it was in the name of trying to create a safe haven for Jews post the Holocaust, post the tragedy and horrific persecution of Jews across the world at that time. And I love the fact that it was my ancestors that provided that, right, in many ways. But they did it in a way that took their human dignity away, right? And it was forced on them. And
and we're going to get to her next comment in just a second, which is also pretty outrageous. But this is the part that a lot of people don't like. She said, there's always kind of a calming feeling, I tell folks, when I think of the Holocaust. Why anyone would have a calming feeling when they think about the Holocaust really doesn't make any sense. Now, to give her some credit, at the end of that comment, she did kind of admit that it was a terrible tragedy against Jews. But a lot of people are upset at what she said, including House Minority Whip Steve Scalise. This is what he said in a statement. He said, there is no justification for the twisted and disgusting comments made by Rashida Tlaib just days after the annual Day of Holocaust Remembrance. More than 6 million Jews were murdered during the Holocaust. There is nothing calming about that fact. He continues on. He says, unfortunately, this is far from the first display of heinous anti-Semitic comments coming from the Democratic House members this year, and it's clear this is now the norm for their caucus. Now, House Republican Conference Chair Liz Cheney also weighed in. She said her comments were sickening and called on Pelosi and House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer to finally take action against Representative Tlaib and other members of the Democratic caucus who are spreading vile anti-Semitism. So that's the first part that a lot of people are upset about. It has to do with her saying it's a calming feeling. But the other part that a lot of people are upset about, and I'm more upset about, was the historical inaccuracies. This idea that, one, the Palestinians just kind of opened up their land and let them, just let them stay there to give them a safe haven. Jews had been immigrating to Israel for decades before World War II. And plus, it's their ancestral homeland. They tried to live peacefully with the Palestinians, and the surrounding Arab countries constantly attacked them and tried to kick them out. But they bought that land peacefully for the most part decades before World War II. They bought it. It was sold to them. They bought it. They're living there. They were living peacefully. And then the surrounding Arab countries and the surrounding areas didn't like that there were Jews there and constantly attacked them. That's the biggest problem with that. But then what Tlaib says next is also pretty amazing. I didn't know this about her. A lot of times we hear about the two-state solution. In Israel, we need a two-state solution. She thinks we need a one-state solution. This is what she said.
When I think about a one state, I think about the fact that why couldn't we do it in a better way where And I don't want people to do it in the name of Judaism, just like I don't want people to use Islam in that way. It has to be done in a way of values around equality and around the fact that you shouldn't oppress others so that you can feel free and safe. Why can't we all be free and safe together?
Now, the idea of everyone being free and safe together, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But the idea of making a one-state solution, the Palestinians would love that because it would basically wipe the Jews out of that region. That's the whole point of them wanting to do that, because all the Arab countries and all the Palestinians and all the surrounding areas would use that newfound freedom to work to kick the Jews out of the region. That's what history shows. Melissa, you look like you have a lot of things to say about this.
There's so much. I mean, just from the very start, the whole calming feeling. I mean, it's really awkward language to use, and I don't think that means she necessarily supports the Holocaust.
No, I don't think she does either, but
she clearly...
she's downplaying it.
Yeah,
it's amazing that we're talking about the Holocaust here, and she immediately goes to the plight of the Palestinians.
Right.
And it's like, we're not talking about the Palestinians here. We're talking about 6 million Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust.
Her statement is objectively false, okay? It's a common claim, too, that you see in the anti-Semitic rhetoric.
Yeah.
Which, as you said, and it's just leading to the destruction of the Jewish state, and that's the bottom line. And Tlaib is a mess. Okay?
Right.
And she should never have said that.
Definitely a mess. And there's another Democrat who was a mess, and that is Kamala Harris. What she said in an interview over the weekend has to go in our loony left file. We'll get to that and have Orlando's news, weather, and traffic all coming up here on News Radio 93.1 WFLA. Yes, the loony left file. I know this is something that Bud usually does, but I had to bring it in today because I happened to hear this interview over the weekend with Senator Kamala Harris out of California. She did an interview with Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union, and she had a couple of comments that, well, are pretty loony unless, of course, you're on the left. The first comment she made actually is more than loony. It's kind of dangerous when you're talking about the future of constitutional government. It has to do, once again, with gun control. She brought up the issue with gun control and said this.
What we're waiting for is Congress to have the courage to act. And so let me tell you what I'm proposing. I'm proposing, one, that if by my 100th day in office, when elected President of the United States, the United States Congress fails to put a bill on my desk to sign with all of the good ideas or any of the good ideas, then I'm prepared to take executive action because that's what's needed.
This really bothers me. And frankly, this is kind of something that both sides have started doing now. This is not how it's supposed to work in a constitutional government. You don't just say, well, if Congress doesn't do something, I'm going to do something. I'm going to wait for you to do something. And if you don't do what I like, then I'm just going to do it. No. You are the head of the executive branch. You execute the laws that Congress makes. Now, this was a reason why I did not support Trump using executive action to get part of the wall funding. I just wanted to point that out. So Trump isn't completely innocent on this, and that's why I didn't like it. But this is even worse. This sets a precedent where she has no authority to do something like that. And she's basically saying, Congress, if you don't make the laws, I'm just going to make my own law. Now, she also had another comment when it came to illegal immigrants and health care. This is what she said.
So you support giving universal health care, Medicare for all, to people who are in this country illegally?
Let me just be very clear about this. I am opposed to any policy that would deny in our country any human being from access to public safety, public education, or public health, period.
Now, I understand why she wants to do this. It seems compassionate to want to give them access to health care, illegal immigrants. The problem is we already have thousands of illegals every month now trying to get in this country illegally. And when you put stuff like that out there, like public education, she said, and health care, all that does is create a bigger magnet for more illegals to want to break into this country and come in illegally. And that's a problem. I understand that we want to help people, but we're just giving them an incentive to come here illegally, and it just makes the problem even worse. And this is Yaffee, filling in for Bud. Bud will be back tomorrow. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at PMOWFLA. I call it that because I do my own show Monday through Friday, 5 to 6 p.m. PM Orlando, where we cover a lot of breaking local and national news. So one thing that was news last week was something that Joe Biden said. Now, when Joe Biden said this, a lot of people thought, oh, man, this guy is just out of touch. He's out of his mind. Remember when he said this?
China is going to eat our lunch? Come on, man. They can't even figure out how to deal with the fact that they have this great division between the China Sea and the mountains in the west. They can't figure out how they're going to deal with the corruption that exists within the system. I mean, they're not bad folks, but guess what? They're not competition for us. But here's where we are. We're in a situation where right now we have not only the strongest military in the world, we have led not by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. That's why the rest of the world has referred to us. Not a joke.
Now, when most people heard that comment the first time, they thought, what is wrong with him? He is so out of touch. Maybe he's just getting old. He's out to lunch. What is going on? But then I started thinking about this, and I actually mentioned this on my Friday night show, Beyond Reason Radio. I started thinking about this, and I was like, you know what? There might be a more troubling reason, a more serious reason why Joe Biden did that. Why he wants to be soft on China. And it might be a very corrupt reason. Well, Peter Schweitzer had a piece in the New York Post over the weekend. By the way, his books are great. I recommend his book, Extortion, came out a few years ago. He did the Clinton Cash book and all that stuff as well. He has a piece that says the troubling reason why Biden is so soft on China, and it's not that he just doesn't get it. He says it's because his son and him created this business relationship with China behind the scenes using the vice president's office to push this. And they did that behind the scenes, and that's why Biden really wants to be soft on China. It says here in 2013, then Vice President Joe Biden and his son Hunter Biden flew aboard Air Force Two to China. Less than 2 weeks later, Hunter Biden's firm inked a $1 billion private equity deal with a subsidiary of the Chinese government's Bank of China. The deal was later expanded to $1.5 billion. In short, the Chinese government funded a business that it co-owned along with the son of a sitting vice president. And this was all done after a meeting that Joe Biden had in China with government officials. Schweitzer says here, if it sounds shocking that a vice president would shape U.S.-China policy as his son, who has scant experience in private equity, clinched a coveted billion-dollar deal with an arm of the Chinese government, that's because it is shocking. It says, with the aid of subpoena power, here's what we know. The business of Hunter Biden and his partners created a series of LLCs that involved in multi-billion dollar private equity deals with companies owned by the Chinese government. It says the timing of this meeting was also notable. It occurred just hours before Hunter Biden's father, the vice president, met with Chinese President Hu Jintao in Washington as part of the Nuclear Security Summit. He sums it up. 12 days after Hunter stepped off Air Force Two in Beijing, Hunter being Joe Biden's son, his company signed a historic deal with the Bank of China, the state-owned financial behemoth often used as a tool of the Chinese government. The Bank of China had created a first-of-its-kind investment fund, and one of its founding partners was none other than Rosemont Seneca Partners, LLC, which is that company that worked with Hunter Biden. Long story short, and there's a lot more in this piece, I would recommend you go check out and read this whole piece by Peter Schweitzer. It was in the New York Post over the weekend, that Joe Biden probably has some backroom business deals, and his family does, with China and the Chinese government. And that is probably the real reason why he is soft on China. There's nothing, it's a lot worse than just saying he's out of touch or something. Speaking of China, by the way, we've been talking about the trade deal with China. Right now, the talks have stalled. We have tariffs on Chinese imports. I'd said something on Friday's show with Bud that got some criticism, but actually Trump's chief economic advisor...
What, you mean that statement about how we're going to be paying for everything?
Right.
I knew it. I knew this was going to come back.
We're going to talk about that in Orlando's news, weather, and traffic, all in just 2 minutes here on WFLA. Yes, and this is Yaffee filling in for Bud. Bud will be back tomorrow. There was something that Trump tweeted out on Friday that I criticized because it's just not correct or very misleading, and it has to do with the trade talks with China. He said this. He said the U.S. only sells China approximately $100 billion of goods and products, a very big imbalance. With over $100 billion in tariffs that we take in, we will buy agricultural products, yada, yada, yada. He said talks with China continue. There's absolutely no need to rush, as tariffs are now being paid to the United States by China of 25% on $250 billion worth of goods and products. And the part I criticize is when he said are now being paid to the U.S. by China. And I pointed out to Bud, that's not really how it works. China doesn't pay the tariffs. American companies pay the tariffs. They pay the tariff, which is basically a tax that they are paying on Chinese goods being imported. And a lot of times those American companies will pass that cost on to the consumer. Now, I wasn't the only one who brought this up. Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday was talking to Trump's chief economic advisor, Larry Kudlow. He brought this up, and they basically both agreed with what I said. Here it is.
Here's what President Trump had to say this week.
Our country can take in $120 billion a year in tariffs, paid for mostly by China, by the way, not by us. A lot of people try and steer it in a different direction. Ultimately, it's paid for largely by China.
But, Larry, that isn't true. It's not China that pays tariffs. It's the American importers, the American companies that pay what, in effect, is a tax increase and oftentimes passes it on to U.S. consumers.
Fair enough. In fact, both sides will pay. Both sides will pay in these things. And, of course, it depends.
If it's a tariff on goods coming into the country, the Chinese aren't paying.
No, but the Chinese will suffer GDP losses and so forth with respect to a diminishing export market and goods that they may need for their own
I understand that, but the president says China doesn't. China, it pays the tariffs. They may suffer consequences, but it's U.S. businesses and U.S. consumers who pay, correct?
Yes, to some extent. I don't disagree with that. Again, both sides will suffer on this.
So that was the only point that I was trying to make on Friday, that China doesn't pay the tariffs. They might suffer some of the consequences, like Chris Wallace said, but they're not paying the tariffs directly. When you say they're paying the tariffs directly, that's kind of misleading to some people, that China has, takes the brunt of all the consequences. Yeah. They don't. Now, some people like tariffs because they like protectionism. They like the idea of, quote, protecting American companies. Trump's been kind of all over the place on this. He says he loves tariffs, but then he says he wants all tariffs to be gone. That's my only criticism with there. It's kind of hard where he stands on tariffs. But to say that China pays the tariffs, it's just kind of a weird end-around way of saying it, which I don't agree with.
And Kudlow did agree with Chris Wallace that the tariffs are being not paid by China but by us, and but he also mentioned the consequences in trying to kind of defend the president's position.
Right. It will affect their gross national product as well.
And that's the point of it. That's the whole point of doing it, is to affect them somewhat, but That's
but
what
yes,
Trump
Michael,
should say.
you were right. They're passing the savings on to us.
Yeah.
What?
And this is Yaffee filling in for Bud, even though Bud is off today. He'll be back tomorrow, by the way. He did send me an email highlighting a story that maybe I would want to look at. He said that Vice President Mike Pence spoke at Liberty University, gave the commencement speech, and that it was very powerful, and I'd probably want to listen to it. So I took Bud's advice, of course. He is the host of the show. And I listened to the whole speech. And I agree. It is very powerful. Not only does he stand up for religious freedom generally, which is good to hear from the vice president, but he stands up for Christianity and his Christian faith. And if there's anyone in the country who has been attacked for his Christian faith, it has been Vice President Mike Pence. Over and over again, he is ridiculed for how he lives his faith. And yet, he stands firm on it, and he had warnings to those graduates at Liberty University. Now, Liberty University, the university started by Jerry Falwell. It's in Lynchburg, Virginia, Christian University. And he spoke to them about how Christianity really, and religious freedom, is really under attack across the world and is ridiculed a lot of times here in America. Here is some of what he said.
The truth is, we live in a time when the freedom of religion is under assault. Yesterday, I was informed by the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom that today, Christians suffer more persecution around the world than any other religion. In fact, the United Kingdom released a report just last week that said persecution of Christians worldwide is near genocide levels. In the last few months, we've seen unspeakable attacks on people of faith, on Jewish synagogues in Pennsylvania and California, on mosques in New Zealand, Christian churches in Sri Lanka, and on 3 historically black churches in Louisiana. No one should ever fear for their safety in a place of worship, and these attacks on people of faith must stop.
Great comments by the vice president talking about religious freedom and how it's under attack, not just against Christians, but against all faiths. Now, we are blessed to live in the United States of America, where attacks on Christianity are mostly, verbal attacks on Twitter or something. It's in the culture. But across the world, Vice President Mike Pence, he's right that Christianity and attacks on Christians, especially in places like Africa and the Middle East, are at almost genocidal levels. He's right, and it's good to hear him stand up for faith. But he also had a warning to those Christians who are about to graduate that you're going to face opposition right here in the U.S., is what he said.
Throughout most of American history, it's been pretty easy to call yourself Christian. It didn't even occur to people that you might be shunned or ridiculed for defending the teachings of the Bible. But things are different now. Some of the loudest voices for tolerance today have little tolerance for traditional Christian beliefs. So as you go about your daily life, just be ready. Because you're going to be asked not just to tolerate things that violate your faith, you're going to be asked to endorse them. You're going to be asked to bow down to the idols of the popular culture. So you need to prepare your minds for action, men and women. Know that you'll face challenges. You'll face opposition. But just know this. If, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you end up in the fire, there'll be another in the fire.
Do you feel like Pence is right? If you are a Christian listening to this show right now, do you feel like our culture and people in this country are increasingly attacking your faith in some way? Now, what is the best way to fight against this? What is the best way to fight back? Well, Vice President Mike Pence, we're going over his speech at Liberty University. He had some advice on how Christians should fight back against these attacks. And I think he's exactly right. Here's what he said.
1 week ago, I was standing before the charred remains of Mount Pleasant Baptist Church in Louisiana. And I must tell you, I was deeply inspired by the example of Pastor Gerald Toussaint. He was a pastor of one of the 3 churches that was burned. But he was the one that said on the day that they arrested the arsonist, he said, quote, "We've got to forgive him." Pastor Toussaint brought a community together with faith and grace. They overcame evil with good.
He said the way you fight back is the way that pastor did that he was talking about, with forgiveness, that you have to overcome evil with good. But my question to you is, if you were a Christian listening to Mike Pence, do you agree with him? Do you feel like your Christian faith in this country is increasingly under attack, under assault? Mostly verbally, but in the culture and, of course, in the political left. 407-916-5400. You can text to 23680 where standard message and data rates apply. And is the best way to fight back forgiveness, tolerance, fight evil with good? Talk more about this. We have Orlando's news, weather, and traffic all coming up here on Good Morning Orlando. So we were just listening to some cuts of Vice President Mike Pence's speech at Liberty University over the weekend, where he defended religious liberty and defended his Christian faith and noted that Christianity is increasingly under attack around the world and including here in the U.S. I agree with them. I would encourage anyone to go watch the entire speech because it was really, really good. Let's take some calls on this subject. Let's go to Robert in Oviedo. Robert, how are you, my friend?
Yaffee, good morning, buddy.
Hey,
the liberal progressivism, they preach, if it feels good, just do it. And I'll tell you, with Christianity, we teach, personal responsibility, and we're accountable for our actions. And they hate that. We're like spoiling the party, so to speak. They don't like personal responsibility or being accountable for what you do. And that's why the media is all over anti-Christian everything,
They want an excuse to sin, it sounds like.
No, they do. If it feels good, just do it, regarding how it affects somebody else.
I agree with you on that. Robert, thank you so much for your call. There's an interesting piece by Dennis Prager I found in the Daily Wire about why leftists, not liberals, but leftists, are opposed to the Bible. We'll get to that in a sec. Let's go to Olin in Palm Bay. Olin, what's your take on Pence's speech?
Hey, good morning, Michael. I want to first say that I was raised to be a Christian by my mother, but I never accepted Christianity. And, we all observed all the Christian holidays and all that stuff. But Mr. Vice President Pence mentioned what we had to do to overcome this hatred and stuff. He didn't mention what it was that we had to do to win these people over. And I don't think that's possible. I think these people nowadays, these hate groups, people that hate Christians, hate whites, hate Jews, I don't think he understands how dangerous these people are. So what is he going to do to convert one of these haters into accepting your Christian belief?
Well, he's not only, and Olin, I appreciate your call. He said you convert them with good. You fight evil with good. You fight evil with love. And he's not even really, he wasn't just talking about converting everyone to Christianity in his speech. He was just talking about standing up for your faith and fighting back against evil with forgiveness, kindness, and love. And I know that's a very radical thing that a lot of people think is impossible and doesn't accept, but the Bible can be pretty radical
Michael,
at times.
Everything that's rattling around my head right now keeps coming back to the golden rule, though. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So if you are seeking forgiveness, then you have to give it as well.
Yeah. Oh, exactly right. And there was one thing that he said that I found very interesting, Mike Pence. He said, you're going to be called not to just tolerate other faiths, other ideas, which Christians, of course, can tolerate it. You're going to be called to endorse it. You're going to be called to bow down to the idols of this culture, the false idols of this culture. And that's really what the problem is, that a lot of people who are not of faith look on Christians and they want them to denounce their beliefs in Christianity and endorse whatever it is they believe instead. So I'll get to what Dennis Prager said on this later in the show. Go ahead, Melissa.
I was going to read the text. Texter said Vice President Pence is absolutely correct. Pastor is also correct. Basically, they're quoting Christ. They would add that Paul said, put on the full armor of God, and once you're done there, then stand and pray.
Exactly right. Good text by one of our listeners.